Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Kiwi Talks. My guest today is the brainchild behind the best Metroid fan project and one of the best fan projects, period, AM2R. I'd like to welcome Dr. M64. How you doing?
Hi, a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking time out. How did you get the name Dr. M64, by the way?
Um, because that back in the day there was this website called 64digits.com. It was pretty much a game maker community, and the nickname Dr. M was taken. So I went with 64, whatever. And that nickname is, from the neighborhood. People used to call me Doctor because I usually look like a very serious person.
Right.
Even if when you're meeting with a couple of things in, and everyone is smiling, I was actually kind of serious. So yeah, he looks like a very serious lawyer or something. He's the doctor, and that's kind of like where that particular nickname came from.
Right,
Kind of.
right. So do your colleagues at Moon Studios call you Milton, or do they call you Dr. M
They
or
they
Doctor?
call me Milton. They do call me Milton. Yes.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. So obviously, what you went through to get to where you are is an amazing story, and I'm so stoked for you, given the hard work that you put in all those years on AM2R. Were there any points that you considered throwing in the towel? Where you're like, why am I doing this to myself? Why am I putting myself through this?
Well, there were too many, and it's not about how difficult some of these times were,
Yeah,
because there were quite a lot of very rough times in that time span. The thing is, it was a long time. 10 years is a long, long time, and
yeah.
my life changed a lot in that particular time span. I grew up as a person, and with all of the growing pains that come with life, uh, having to keep this particular, personal project was difficult, but was also kind of necessary for me. Trying to keeping my stuff together and putting my effort into something that had a goal. It
Mm.
meant something. It was something that was very necessary in some of those complicated times. But then again, this would have been so much different if the community wasn't as involved as it is. There's very accepting and passionate people in the Metal community. You may think, okay, so this month I'm going to be posting a blog post explaining why I couldn't show any tangible progress, right?
Mm.
I had some difficulties, some technical stuff, my computer was a mess, whatever. This month I cannot show any progress. I write a blog post like every month, and sometimes I was prepared to, get some backlash, angry people saying, yo, why don't you work on the game? Come on, I'm waiting for you. And that didn't happen. People were super understanding about it. I got support. Even if I wasn't super explicit on the things that were happening to me, people were there. They were super understanding, and that's super, super amazing. And not wanting to let down those people that were expecting the product to be done, that was one of the many factors that kept me going.
Mm. So did you map out everything from the get-go? Like in terms of how where you ended up. So in terms of mapping out the actual map of the entire world and adding in additional things, was that fully mapped out from the get-go, or were you constantly changing stuff around
So
as you were developing it?
So about 80% of the contents was more or less there from the get-go, trying to apply the room sizes that I needed, the typical 320 by 240 screen,
Mm.
translated pretty much with the GBA sizes, that's 160 by 144, trying to translate those proportions into that particular size that my game engine was using. That base was there. Now, how much original content was going to be added, that changed over time a lot, up to the very last moment. My main inspiration for this kind of remake was Metroid Zero Mission,
Mm.
and there's quite a lot of faithful landmarks that you can actually identify from the original game, but there's also a little bit of new content, and that's what kept the game pretty fresh. So I wanted to do something like that, up to which extent that's changed over time a lot. It started with a very original area that pretty much was a skill test for testing the players' battle skills besides Metroid, and that was pretty much a failure. By the time the player reaches that particular area, they have so much power, they have so many abilities that whatever I threw at the player, it was trivial. So pretty much on the last stretch of the development, I had to redesign the entire original area to pretty much have its own particular gimmicks and limit the player in other ways, also tying up with the mechanical design of the environments. So yeah, whatever ended up there ended up being pretty solid anyways, and it had some ideas I've been, developing over the years. Again, having 10 years to work and think on what the environments are going to be is certainly nice. I mean, I always thought, isn't it weird that throughout the Metroid series, there's so many environmental puzzles and mechanisms that require a sphere to be perfectly fit into one location to actually activate something? I mean, what were the spheres in the Joso society? Do you go with a key ring with several spheres and okay, I got the house keys. Okay, door opens. How does the Joso society operate those kind of contraptions? And I found a pretty practical way to explain it in my original area, and it pretty much fit very well with the problems I was trying to solve.
So how did Skippy the bot come into it? Yeah, obviously before the fan game that you ended up making recently, but how far in development did that come about? Because that's a cool little section.
Oh, yeah. You know what? I was kind of tired of the typical, I mean, there's a very typical set of choices that a designer has to break up the pace a little bit. Right. So the easy answers are, let's trap the player between two walls and throw enemies. They clear the enemies and then they are free to go. That's one way of doing that. The other one could be obligatory turret session. You're infinite scrolling through an environment and there's enemies attacking and you're stationary there with some sort of cannon. You can do that if you wish. That didn't apply to my particular game. And other way would be, okay, some quirky way to remote control something else. You don't see that very often. And I think in this particular area, where there's pretty much a factory for robots, maybe this could kind of work. And I did try it. It sucked. And it took... At one point, it took way much more time and effort than an actual level. It's only one screen.
Yeah.
And that layout changed so much. Skippy was originally going to be a crane. You just remote control a crane, left, right, go down, pick up the thingy, and drop it wherever you need it. It worked. The prototype worked. It was super solid. It was amazing. It was technically functional, and it was boring. So I added several hazards. So you need to pretty much change the level of the crane to avoid some spikes or rotating thingies. You get to see those spinny blades that have no logical explanation of what they do, but whatever. You avoid those, and okay, it's still boring. It's just move things through maze. So pretty much detaching the arm from whatever was in the ceiling felt right. Suddenly you have a character controller, right? And suddenly you're not, you're pretty much detached from the mechanical side of the environment and you're on your own. And that proved to be a challenge. My logical step was, let's use the hopping bot because that's already coded in the game. I just replicate that and only add a little bit of variety on how much the player is pressing the button to see how high they can actually hop around. It was fun. Making the layout that made sense and it's not super frustrating, that was another challenge. But I think some people find it a little bit long they need the amount of steps they need to take once they figure out the mechanics and what they need to do. But overall, it had a very good reception. It was a very nice change of pace in the middle of the typical, let's go to an area, find all the metros, fight all the metros, oh, new method evolution, whatever, never see that, let's go, next area. Usually, I use the mini bosses to change the pace and have something different, but these kind of mechanical things, every once in a while, felt nice. And in this case, it worked quite well.
Because you made the Flash game recently. How long did that actually take you to put all that together?
Oh, okay. That thing is made with Unity.
Yep.
And one thing that I started getting a taste of lately is game jams. There was one particular game jam that caught my attention. It's the GB Jam. It's basically you have 5 days. I think it's more. I think it's a week, where you have that limited time to make a game within the limitations of the Game Boy, right? And okay, I'm familiar with this kind of limitations. I'm not that good of a sprite artist, so limiting to myself to just 4 colors is going to be making it easier, I guess. And I set myself to remake a game from the Commodore 64. I'm not sure if you ever heard of Cybernoid for the C64.
Cybernoid. No, I don't think I have. But explain
Okay,
anyway. I'm sure other
it's
people
pretty
have.
much, imagine a shoot 'em up,
Yep.
but your character ship is pretty much like a character controller from a platformer. You just move sideways, you can actually shoot to sides, you explore different screens like mazes, and the unique thing about that particular character controller is that you have gravity. Every time you are not touching the joystick, the ship falls down to gravity. So besides having to navigate tricky obstacles and fight enemies, you need to keep pushing up to pretty much maintain your height. So it's kind of like Gradius meets Flappy Bird meets Metroid. It's some very weird combination. Back in the day when people like to experiment with new concepts, it was super hard, but it was one of the classics that I did enjoy in my childhood. So I said, maybe I can remake this and try to fit it in the tiny screen. And it was a very interesting exercise on figuring out how many of the things in that particular production pipeline works in Unity. And since I already had that laid out and I had to prepare something for the anniversary, I said to myself, okay, so I have limited time to either finish my post-mortem that I've been planning for years, explaining how some of the technical aspects of the game were pulled off, regarding how Meritus were animated, how the skeleton animation of the Queen was coded, and all the moving parts, how some of the elements of the map and how the concepts became to be. That was a very fascinating project that I'm still working on, and yeah, I wasn't able to finish it, so I guess I'll make a game. I said to myself. So yeah, I pretty much made that particular game in 2 weeks. And like before,
Wow.
the character controller was the most complicated part to actually get right. Then again, this is all my free time. So finding a bit of free time in my complicated day to just try to make that strange character that's going to be a mixture of co-op and getting over it to not be super frustrating it took many revisions. It's very easy to actually play with physics and get things bouncing around. It's super fun, but actually make it so it's intuitive and it requires a little bit of mastery to actually do interesting moves with it. It was certainly a challenge, and there's a lot of nuances on the tiny bit of forces that you can actually apply and how much that changes overall on the feel of the actual character. And yeah, the other huge challenge was actually making levels for that. I wanted to keep it super simple, super concise. There is one goal, you need to master one particular technique per level, and that pretty much serves as the tutorial. And yeah, I was able to actually crank out 10 levels, and the idea was actually to expand it, but time is treacherous.
Given the fact that you touch pretty much every element of the design, right, from the actual artwork to programming and AI, music, would you say there was one specific area that you found the hardest to work on?
Ooh, um, uh, music, one of the most interesting.
Because you are a
And
musician and you have your own, well, you had your own recording studio, but you don't
yes,
anymore, right?
no, I had to sell all my stuff.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm now pretty much a full-time developer.
yeah,
But back in the day, I did specialize much more on arrangements, and I was more of a sound engineer. Recording bands, mixing, mastering, that
yeah.
kind of thing.
Cool.
As a composer, my experience is kind of limited and in very specific genres, and that's why I had to be very careful about the kind of instruments and the kind of vibe that I was going to be choosing for M2R. If I was going to be doing that for the most part by myself, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So since I do have a little bit of a background in producing electronic music, um, my best bet was trying to imitate the Prime series. They weren't that orchestral. If I try to do something similar to the SNES, sound chip and that style, I mean, I did identify that there is a lot of nuance in that particular kind of ambience that I wasn't able to replicate. I knew my limits, but playing with the textures of something that's more synthetic and electronic felt something that I could achieve much more, effectively. And I went that route. Again, that did take quite a lot of time to produce over time, and some of the techniques and instrument choices did evolve over time also. So if you try the first couple demos, there is still very subtle changes in how the first couple tracks are mixed and how the instruments are presented, and compared to the final product, where all of the sound of the entire game has already been established and all of that has been retroactively applied to the first couple tracks. Again, I was able to properly remaster that soundtrack and release it for free. So if you want to give it a listen somehow, you're free to do so.
Yeah. So how many iterations would you do? Like say, because you did a couple of remixes, like Brinstar, you did the Chica Lava boss theme. Like, would you just make it and then you'd be done with it, or would you go back and refine it?
Only when I think it's necessary,
Yeah.
mostly because it's super time consuming.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's not about a matter of quality, it's mostly about how well certain themes vibe between each other in proximity, right? So I approach the central industrial area. Suddenly I'm trapped in a room and the boss music kicks in. Is this particular boss music too distinct and out of place compared to the previous song? After the boss is over, is the song that kicks in, part of the same game? Soundscape wise,
Yeah, yeah.
that kind of thing. Finding the balance and make it feel like a cohesive kind of soundtrack. That was mostly about what the actual revisions were about. Compositions, pretty much taking original compositions as a starting point was super, super helpful, and it saved a lot of time. And there was a couple of tracks that I did in collaboration with other people to make them original. And the original area already features new assets that were done from scratch, original mechanics, and it wouldn't make sense to actually also use original music. So composing via Skype was something that I never imagined I was actually going to do. And, the drivers that the music software I use are kind of finicky, and they don't play well with the being able to actually share your audio via stream. So having to switch back and forth between devices to actually hit play and have the other people listen. Okay, let's change this particular instrument and let's change a couple of notes. I'm going to send you the updated project file back and forth, and then okay, gonna render this real quick into MP3. Okay, here goes. And that was super time consuming. I'm pretty sure now things are more streamlined for live work, but back then, it was certainly a very interesting process. Time consuming, but certainly interesting.
One of the things that's a bit of a noose around the original game is the Metroid encounters, because they can become very repetitive, right? Very quickly. And it's something that is basically part of the DNA of the original game. So, what was your approach to that to try and avoid or lessen the repetitiveness of the Metroid encounters? Because
So
that would have been hard, I'm
yes,
sure.
it was where most of the work went. Basically, the worst offenders were the alpha metroids. The those happen to be appearing everywhere,
Yeah.
and you can, even if you can apply different arenas around the actual fight, let's add some spikes, lava, whatever. That's going to be adding some variety up to a certain point, right? So I'm not sure if it was enough, but there are a couple of parameters that you can actually properly tweak per particular Metroid encounter. So every single Metroid encounter has handcrafted parameters that decide how fast it works, how fast it accelerates, how reactive it is, and how aggressive it is. There's a specific parameter that pretty much every couple of seconds, besides chasing you, is going to be taking distance at a specific offset from Samus, and that offset can be changed per Metroid, and that single parameter can actually change the way you perceive that particular fight. Suddenly, this guy is actually retreating, so it can actually charge attack at you later on. Although another Metroid has that below Samus, so if Samus is on top of a platform, the guy is going to be going below the platform, and by the time the state ends and regains control, the chase is going to be resumed from the other side of the platform, and suddenly it becomes unpredictable, like a living organism. It's not that complicated, but at least that uncertainty in the middle of this very simple step machine add a little bit of variety. Some people find it annoying. Some people find the AI being super bouncy and trying to chase like a bee that's trying to escape. Again, it's all about making those chases use the toolset that the player has. In the original Metroid 2, the thing would actually chase at the player in several intervals, pausing every second or so. And that was effective because your movement options were pretty limited. You didn't have that much range aiming. And for that particular game engine, it was fine. In this particular iteration, since you can actually aim in 8 directions and you have a lot of mobility, being able to play with positioning was pretty much the main challenge. So that, in cooperation with the layout of the arena, would make every single fight unique. Are they unique enough? That's something that people, you have to ask people. But for me, it was certainly an improvement over the original.
Yeah, well, it's pretty hard. I mean, I can see that even Nintendo struggled themselves with Samus Returns, with trying to keep it diverse. So was the AI particularly hard to program for with the Metroids?
Not really. It's if you pretty much break down the AI of the Metroids in their states and what they do, it's super simple.
Oh, is
The
it?
thing is, they are so customizable, and most of the movement of the Metroids rely on accelerations. That way, they feel so unpredictable. And since the accelerations do depend mostly on Samus's position, and Samus' position is changing all the time because we need to properly position ourselves to actually deal with the Metroid, it becomes super unpredictable. Suddenly you have this thingy that's floaty, and you're kind of able to lead the Metroid if you actually jump and move around. You're going to be dictating with the Metroid moves, but not as predictably as you think. So it's kind of unpredictable, but overall it's actually deterministic. One of the many ideas I had from back in the day was to actually make a replay system that would actually allow me to record a file with all the inputs and being able to actually play it back. Something that was very inspired by the speedrun community. Being able to actually, see my video movements and replay something was also going to be a very useful testing tool to replicate certain scenarios and see if the behaviors are actually consistent over builds or over changes. That never came through, but the deterministic factor of very predictable outcomes for the actual Metroid state machine, that's still there. It's super simple, but then again, since it depends on the position of the player, and the player's position is changing all the time, yeah, it looks very, very organic and quite convincing sometimes.
So was that the hardest thing to overhaul, the Metroids? Or was it like environments as well? Like what was the most challenging thing in terms of overhauling stuff that already existed but really needed to be modernized?
One of the most challenging were the bigger Metroids. The Zeta, the Omega, and the
Yeah.
Queen Metroids.
And the Queen, yeah.
Those, those were pretty interesting. Just to display the thing, just to show the thing on the screen,
Right.
I had to make separate projects on GameMaker. I was already pushing the boundaries of the GameMaker quite a lot,
Yeah.
and the projects were super heavy. Back then, the GameMaker 1.4, whenever I was actually opening the project, it took about 5 or 6 minutes just to open the project.
Wow.
And if you hit play, the first time it compiles, it's about 4 or 5 minutes more that it actually needs to, prepare all the assets.
Yeah.
And then you will actually able to actually play the game. Yeah, that time adds up quite a lot. And if you're going to be iterating, just to see if the head is properly aligned with the neck of some creature, it would take forever. So I pretty much made a bare bones project for every single big Metroid and made some very rudimentary tools for repositioning assets for the every single animation, right?
Wow.
So it's basically like a very rudimentary and very simplified version of a skeletal animation. So we have a torso, we have some legs that are attached and they have fixed angle. And based on the rotation of the actual torso, you have the position of the head that's going to be following one particular point. Finding that point and applying the rotations of every single sprite was kind of tiresome, but since this was a fresh project and it would compile in just a couple of seconds, I would be able to actually iterate very easily. And I did add quite a lot of shortcuts for changing positions and showing the offset on the screen. So whenever I found the right position for the head for this particular state, I would write it down. So it was -6, 14, whatever. Hit stop, go to the script, and then type those positions in that particular animation. It was quite straightforward compared to having to wait almost 5 minutes to just hit play and have the thing working.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I do have a couple of those with very basic. The actual Queen project, you are actually able to control the Queen with the keyboard, and you have the variable terrain that was just a couple of colliders, just to test what could I achieve with this particular character. The Queen is a very interesting character, and the design and the resources that I had were very limiting on what I could actually do. I couldn't make a huge chamber because, well, by that time Samus has space jump. She can actually fly, right? And the Queen is about 3/4 of a screen. If we jump once or twice, we lose sight of the Queen, right? And I didn't have a turning animation. If I go over the Queen, right, and land on the other side, how do I actually make it react to the
Yeah,
player?
of course.
Do I just flip the head and flip the body? Do I actually make her turn like this or something like that?
Yeah.
It would be kind of weird. So those limitations in production allowed me to focus on the overall boss design. So it's going to be all about traversal and make it very horizontal. That's where the Queen works best. And the actual theme of destroying the environments you have already traversed came from that particular limitation. And the locomotion of all of that was something that had to be figured out in a very separate project. Otherwise, it would be a pain to actually implement and make it look good.
Did you ever have any times where you were editing something in GameMaker and you forgot to save and you lost all your progress?
You have no idea how many times.
Yeah. Like how many times? How many times are we talking? Are we talking in the 20s, the 30s, like hundreds, like
five or six? But each one of those super painful.
Yeah. Was that a crying moment or a rage moment? Combination
No,
of both?
I just collected my thoughts, and for experience, every single time that, for example, the power goes out, and suddenly I lose progress. I knew
Oh,
that it was going to be, that's what the worst. When
yeah,
it's not your fault, it's the worst.
yeah.
Every single time that I restarted something from scratch, that time when I actually made it, it became better.
Oh, right.
So,
Okay.
all in all, if I had to pretty much find some consolation, I would actually think, well, this is an excuse to remake something and make it even better,
That's a good way to
I
look at it.
guess.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I guess.
So there were things that you implemented, like there were, what is it, the liquid distortion filter that you had. So when you just before you get the gravity suit, I think, and then it makes all the whole screen all distorted. Where did that idea come
Yes.
from? Yeah.
Uh, well, there's plenty of games from my youth that use a very specific raster effect. Pretty much you grab pieces of the background and draw them with an offset using a sine wave. And some platformers of the 90s, you would enter the water and some part of the background would be kind of wavy like this. I did try to replicate that and I failed miserably. So I did try to do something similar, but with the actual image itself. I didn't want to make something that was too obvious or too distracting, because there's quite a lot of action going on the screen, and shots, enemies, whatever. If I add more noise to the whole image, even with how complicated some of the tile sets and the actual overlay of the water is, it would become a mess, readability wise, right?
Right.
So what I did was pretty much grab a surface, pretty much a copy of the screen, grab whatever was below a specific height, that would be the surface of the visible water and below, and then use that and draw it with slight offsets to let it. I mean, it's the same wavy effect, but super subtle. It's 1 or 2 pixels. So it's kind of wavy, but not that much, and it's additive. Since the background is quite dark, all of the elements that are pretty much in play are lighter, and you get to see like a glint of brightness that's kind of wavy, but not that much. It took a little bit of time and iterations to actually get it not distracting and not too obvious. You can totally miss it, but if you stay there and you get to see that effect, it's there. It's part of the ambience.
Interesting. That's very, very interesting. And what about the power generator area?
Oh,
How did that come
okay.
about?
Well, pretty much, I needed to challenge the player in a way that it put their abilities to the test. And by that time, yeah, the equipment was pretty much in-game. So the only thing that was able to give the player by that time was the gravity suit, but making an entirely underwater area would be super tedious. Underwater movement is always been pretty heavy on
Yeah.
Metroid,
Yeah.
and I did try to make it, at least the acceleration part, be tedious. And once you actually reach top speed, you're only running 75% of your actual speed. But getting there and jumping and stopping every single time is super tedious. So instead of focusing on that, I left one of the areas underwater, and the rest of the area would actually need to have its own gimmick, right? So pretty much my overall idea will be, I've seen some effects in the Prime series where some enemies will actually obstruct your view, adding noise to your visor. And there was one particular enemy in Metroid Prime 3 that would actually, if you get hit by that particular electrical enemy, your entire suit resets, and you see a small brief boot sequence on your visor.
Ah,
It's super
yes,
awesome.
yes, yes.
And I said, oh, I'm going to steal that idea. That's awesome. I did something similar to that. So where we have this external factor that's going to be affecting the way your mechanics work. And that's how the static electric energy thingy, those electric fields, came to be. So the original idea for that would be, this would only apply in certain locations where I have a stripe of hexagonal sensor thingies on the backside of the wall. If I go through those, suddenly there's noise on the screen and I cannot use any weapons. Suddenly it becomes all about performing. That worked, but it was boring. So I pretty much had to contain those particular, contain those occurrences of when and why those events happen, right? And one of the ideas I've been, developing through the years was why spheres in the Joso society. And one of the utilities that they might be using it for might be to just move things around. Maybe they are containers. What if they are energy containers? What if those things are actually batteries? Right? Would make sense. Do you have a battery for opening this door? Yeah, I have one spare here. Look, and suddenly the door opens. Oh, okay, let's go. And that was pretty much it. That was my excuse. Having this particular element and also making it interact with enemies, since all of the enemies in this area were going to be robotic, no organic elements, that thing would actually work as an EMP of sorts. Suddenly you had a tactical advantage to actually shoot the thing, generate an electric field that would actually inhibit you from shooting, but if you place that particular thing right, you will be getting rid of all of the robotic enemies in the area. So that kind of came together by itself. And then, the utility of having those spheres interact with the environment, that was just another added bonus. So, that's more or less how those elements came to be. The rest was just designing how to introduce that mechanic, how the physicality of those spheres would actually work, and how the player manipulates those to make them reach whatever location you need. Those pretty much are just a straightforward small loop where you actually go through all of those situations one after the other, and suddenly you're just back where you started, near a save point, and with the rest of the game and the area just waiting for you to test those abilities.
Mm-hmm. And what about the escape sequence? Like, how did you sit on the duration of it? Like, how long the escape sequence should be, what the layout should be, the boss while you're going through it? What was the approach with that?
I pretty much eyeballed it. I had no idea how long it
You
was going to
eyeballed
be.
it.
Yeah, I mean, I have all of this chunk of layout, and every single time I pretty much designed the whole thing backwards. It was not about how every single moment would be one after the other, right? It would be, let's escalate from the most tedious way to stop the player in an urgent situation, right? And take it from there, making it less and less tedious, right? So once you enter the area, you may see that there's a ton of bomb blocks that you need to bomb every single one of them to actually traverse. And there's one enemy in the middle, and then there's another string of bomb blocks that you need to bomb one by one. Okay, once you enter in the area, and that's part of the mystique of the area, that's okay, right? But when you have explosions going around and a timer that says you're about to die, and suddenly those bomb blocks are just exploding one by one, and you're suddenly feeling the pressure, and suddenly you stumble upon that same stupid enemy, it completely changes the context of that particular same room. It's a super harmless room, but then again, you're traversing it in a different situation, and suddenly it becomes much more interesting. That was pretty much it. It was make something super tedious, then less tedious, then something full of enemies that you need to overcome, and then pretty much shape it into something that pretty much leads towards the bottom of the planet. One thing that I wanted to add was some sort of elevator. Those elevators are pretty much a staple of every single battle game, and this particular elevator just goes from point A to point B. There's no transition between areas. Just goes from top to bottom.
Right.
And first time you encounter that elevator is for building up the atmosphere, and you're discovering this mysterious location. Okay. But then when you have the time limit and explosions going on, suddenly that elevator goes like, so, come on, faster, come on. It's one of those elements that you want to the rest of the stuff, it's about integrating the speed booster, which is kind of tricky, and it's preparing the speed booster the necessary space to actually be able to trigger the speed booster, that's something that's very enjoyable, right? I don't have enough space. Let me clear those blocks. Now I can actually run and break some blocks. That's enjoyable. That's awesome. That's a piece of a puzzle that you really enjoy in the rest of the game. Here, you have to do it with the time pressure. So those are elements that in any other context are fun. In this case, they are kind of stressful. So yeah, it's a combination of those kind of moments. And the boss was always meant to be some sort of, like a cinematic set piece. Something like, come on, really? I'm in the middle of an escape and I have to fight this? It's all about subverting expectations. It's the typical bosses. The bosses have a very deliberate distribution, depending on in which part of the area they show up, right? So the very first area, you come through a very suspicious corridor, nothing happens. And by the end of the area, you clear all the metros, you go back, and then you fight the boss, right? In the second area, the boss is optional, and it's pretty much in the middle. In the third area, the boss is at the beginning of the area. So you never know when you might be stumbling upon something new, especially the boss. It could be at the beginning of an area or in the middle, it could be optional. There was this uncertainty that kept things fresh, in my opinion, right? And in this particular moment, having a boss in the middle of an escape, that's certainly not something that many people expected. So yeah, I'm pretty sure many found it an interesting and pleasant surprise.
Yeah. I know you approached the speedrunning community for input. What was some of the input that the speedrunning community gave to you? Because you implemented a lot of speedrunning and sequence breaks.
Yes. So I always consider myself a theoretical speedrunner. As in, I know the potential of some shortcuts and stuff, and I can pull it off once if I try it. Don't make me make a run with all of these tricks one after the other in a consistent run, because I cannot. I don't have the skills, I don't have the patience. Some people are insanely skilled for these kind of things, and I do admire them. But yeah, I cannot keep up the pace. There's one particular runner that showed up pretty late during development, and he became one of the lead beta testers. And yeah, he has the ability to break everything. Okay, here's a build with this new mechanic, this new area. Enjoy, have fun. And a couple of hours later, here's a list of all the things I broke. Okay.
Wow.
Lovely. Thank you. It's certainly, for once, it's very demoralizing. It makes me look like a horrible coder to see that all of these very huge mistakes make it through the cracks. But actually being able to polish all of these situations that empty users would actually eventually stumble upon, that was super reassuring. And just having a different set of eyes and a different set of hands play the game is super, super valuable, because I have a very specific playstyle. I play Metroid very meticulously sometimes. And going with different things may lead to different situations that I didn't contemplate when creating environments and the actual character controller. So yeah, speedrunning community both helped into defining what parts of the game could be skippable, and also as very skilled players that would actually push the engine and the environments to its limits.
Because you went from being a solo developer to pretty much working in conjunction with a team, right? So
Pretty much.
Yeah, pretty much. So what, did you do a crash course in project management or anything, or leadership? Or did you just kind of learn?
Absolutely not.
So were you kind of just learning how to manage people as you were doing it?
So this was pretty much a natural progression that was parallel to my personal life.
Yeah.
By the time much more people was showing up as volunteers, I was already started working as a professional programmer. I had left my recording studio, and as a programmer and as part of a team, the ability to adapt to a working schedule and to a production environment is crucial, right? And knowing from the actual trenches what actual production feels like allowed me to use those kind of tools for M2R. So suddenly, out of thin air, I just had a very urgent need to use something to have some sort of issue tracking. Before it was just a couple of emails where someone would actually send an email saying, "Yo, this is breaking at this point." Okay, I fixed it. Try it out. Oh, it's fixed. Nice. Having some sort of more centralized way to manage all of that was super necessary at that point, because there were many volunteers just for that. And also asset production. There were dependencies, and some things needed to be done before others, and these people were donating their valuable free time. If I wasn't respectful regarding their work and how it would be actually displayed in the game, it would be like a disservice to their generosity, so the least I could do is make sure that if they are going to be bothering to draw sprites for some enemy, some asset, some background, I would be doing the best I could to include that in the game and not have it cut, just for time constraints, right? And there was one particular area in the game, the GFS Thoth, the huge ship that's pretty much in the surface, that was pretty much a playground for artists. It was something like, okay, I don't have any design for this. I know that might be a mini boss here, but draw whatever you like, do any machinery you like, make the ambience however you like, guys. Just have fun. Whatever you provide, I'm going to be putting in the game, and I'm going to be making a very simple layout, maybe a couple of scans or something, maybe one E-tank, and that's it. But if you want to flex and expand your portfolio, have fun. And they did. So, yeah.
How did you settle on the lore, the story? Like, on how to elaborate on it?
Okay, one thing that Metroid community is they are very dedicated and very meticulous about details.
Yeah.
And one thing I wanted to be always is super respectful regarding the lore of the game, both the history and how any representation of the Galactic Federation, Samus, the Space Pirates, if any, the Joso culture, all of that needed to make sense, because mostly because of respect. I wasn't trying to emulate Nintendo or whatever. This is something that's loved by many people. The least I can do is produce something that wouldn't be out of place, right? And by that time, there was a very active forum for the project, and many people were much more knowledgeable of the lore than me. So every single decision that I made regarding what things are going to be scanned, what contents there's going to be, there were volunteers that were pretty much dedicated to writing. Since I'm not a native speaker and my grammar is, serviceable, many very dedicated fans that were very acquainted with the lore helped me out with writing, and they came with ideas on how things would actually work, how the biology of the methods would actually work to actually make it make sense, and why would the evolutions happen in this particular place. And there was a lot of content. There was pretty much a documentary on how the actual elevators work. It was fascinating. It was like a mixture of Technobabble and National Geographic, kind of explaining why this biology works. And all of that was reference material to actually write very concise and interesting logs that show you a little bit of the universe. There's a lot of information that's not being revealed, because it's all, in practical terms, it's all fan fiction, right? But establishing the rules and staying within those boundaries, it's like having supplementary material for world building. So we only chose the most important things for the player and some flavor text to spice up the actual, development of the entire world. Then again, it was kind of hard because we wanted to make the scans not feel like a wall of text, but something that could be read. Okay, I'm getting informed about this particular organism. It makes sense in this context. Let's move on. I get what the weak point is or what strategy I need to follow to defeat it. Okay, move on. So yeah, there was a very active community, and I'm super grateful for the help.
Have you played Metroid Dread yet?
Yes.
How did you find it?
Interesting.
In terms of what?
I mean, I'm not entirely sure if the enemies were something that would make sense in Metroid. The
Right.
concept is amazing, right? But if you mix something like survival horror with a huge monster that can one hit kill you,
Yep.
you need to feel vulnerable, right? Think of the first couple of Resident Evils with tank controls and very limited ammo, and you stumble a couple of zombies, you chop them off, but your health is very limited, right? You're feeling that tension, right? That dread. But suddenly, if you're a space hunter that can leap around and jump and have very, very maneuverable moves, and you happen to be able to wall jump and run super fast, that changes the dynamic a lot. Suddenly, the monster has to move at the same pace as you, and suddenly the fail state is faster to achieve, right? So in a run of Resident Evil or any other survival horror, you take a couple of minutes to explore, and suddenly you see the monster, and you try with your very limited resources and mobility to escape and hide and be tactical about your choices. You have time to think and act, right? But since Samus is so snappy, and the actual enemies have to be snappier than her to compensate, you don't have those Metal Gear moments of stealth and taking action. You're pretty much reacting to things. So it's a very
Right.
cat and mouse thing that happens so quickly that for once it's distinct and unique, but it's also kind of annoying in my humble opinion. And that Purple Amy, it's
So, so I take it you died a lot then.
you have no idea.
But what did you, in terms of someone who's obviously developed your own Metroid game, how did you find the mobility of Samus in terms
It's
of,
super polished.
Yeah.
I mean, I can tell you, the first 10 minutes of the game, of my playthrough, was on the first screen. I was giggling like a little girl, and how Samus would actually go through just running, and suddenly she would
and then
actually.
slide?
No, there was a ledge that was, 1 meter high, and she would
Yeah.
actually step on it. And it was, this is the stuff I did, but mine requires to use the jump button. And they actually animated it dynamically. And I was like an idiot, just running around and on that stupid ledge, one block ledge. And suddenly there's a lot of subtlety in that animation. And if you just, the running speed for Samus is fixed, right?
Yeah.
But if you push against that ledge, right, and gently push the stick, the animation of going up that ledge changes depending on how much you press. It's a
Right.
stupid detail, but it's there. It's awesome. And I was like an idiot 5 minutes playing with that stupid ledge there. It was, there's so many details in animation and how they characterize Samus from a, visual design, from the animation. It's very well characterized. It's acting. And these people pull it off flawlessly, in my opinion.
So do you find that with any Metroidvania game that you worked on? Like, or any Metroid game that you play? Or a Metroidvania game, I should say. Right? Do you end up kind of critiquing it and being like, what would I do? If I was making this game, what would I do or change?
It's kind of like
The
curse
developer
of
in
the,
you.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like the curse of the movie maker. If you're a director, and suddenly your way of looking at film is different, right? And suddenly you see, oh, here comes the exposition dump. Here comes the megaphone. Oh, this is the clear cut between Act 2 and 3. Come on, man, do better. Something like that kind of happens, but every once in a while I'll just turn my brain off, put myself into consumer mode, if you wish, and just enjoy. I kind of miss that in games, being able to be surprised with something that doesn't need to be critically analyzed.
Yeah. Because are you able to, when you're developing a game, are you actually able to enjoy it? Does it ever get to a point where it becomes a bit monotonous, whether it was AM2R or even with Ori, right? When you're
The
just
first
working
times,
on it for so long.
yeah, the first times when you create an element and get it working, that's amazing.
Yeah.
The first couple of times it's beautiful. It's something new, awesome, right? Awesome. And then the first fifth time, 10th time, it's not fun anymore, and suddenly, you get burned out very quickly. Totally. That's why it's so important to actually get fresh eyes, because I'm so tired of, trying the same things over and over. And sometimes it's hard to identify what feels fresh and what feels stale in the same game, because everything feels stale. Everything feels, boring by that time. You can identify what might be interesting, and that's maybe why I keep throwing new things and mechanics to the player so often, because I get bored pretty easily by the end of the day. Then again, it's all about pacing, This also kind of imitates how dynamic Zero Mission feels. That's pretty much the main inspiration. And going moment by moment and area by area, how many new things are going to be seen by the player? How many new environments? How many new enemy types, bosses? And how much time does it you need to actually be exposed to this kind of new content? I did try to replicate that and to keep the pace going. Otherwise, people are going to be getting bored.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, hey, I'll wrap up there because I know it's evening there and you've got to have dinner and do your other things, I'm sure. So best to follow you, Twitter, I suppose. Is that the best place to follow you?
Yes,
Yeah.
and please do apologize me if I don't respond right away. Twitter requires me to go through all of the messages and approve them. This same meeting should have happened a couple of months ago. And,
It's all right.
Yeah.
It's all right.
Sorry.
It's no problem. Well, hey, I appreciate you taking the time out and everything that you've done. As I said before, I'm stoked that your career is taken off. It'll be interesting to see where you are in another 10 years.
Let's repeat this same interview 10 years from now.
Yeah.
Right.
But like either way, it's been great to chat to you and pick your brain on your journey. But thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, that is the show, everyone. Make sure you share, like, and subscribe. And until next time, stay safe.